Welcome back to the Epic Universal Podcast. I'm entertainment writer Jim Hill, and this is the podcast where we cover the latest Universal news, rumors, and history. And as always, I'm joined by Eric Hersey. What kind of makes this show different, folks, is it will be posted on the second day of the new year, 2026. But Eric and I are actually recording this on the afternoon of New Year's Eve. So as we were pre-gaming, I had questions about what goes on in the Hersey household on New Year's Eve.
Well, the countdown is on, and it's what, countdown almost 12 hours until we're marking the new year. But it's funny, Jim, that our plans are very Universal and Disney related, and it's happened. It's an odd one. And it's funny enough, my daughter, who's now 15, was getting invited to actual real parties. And she was telling all her teenage friends, not a chance. Yeah, she was saying, because what we do is like, it's about 7 or 8 years in the making now. So in my office or basement or whatever you want to call it, there are pictures surrounding the walls that are all homemade paintings that we've created over the years. And it all started that we were going to make posters, the Disneyland posters, attraction posters. And I got these big canvases, and I said, all right, everybody's going to paint one. And we started that, oddly enough, on New Year's Eve, and we've been doing it for the last 7-8 years. So we all collect. We basically all pick a Disney or Universal. Over the last couple of years, we picked some Universal stuff to paint, and we have a whole bunch of attraction posters all up my walls. So that is, we need to collect 5 more. So everybody has their item selected, what they're going to paint tonight, and we start that. And this was a challenging year because we are also going to watch Stranger Things, the series finale tonight. So, wow. So it's a matter of like, all right, we got to get the painting done in time. So not so much ball dropping. We know we're all old enough now to know like when the time has changed. So like watching the ball drop isn't as important for us. What we want to see is the Stranger Things and make sure that we get that done before the end of the year. So that is what we do every year, Jim.
Wow. I suddenly feel very boring. Nancy and I have a tradition. We go out and get Chinese food, and we then come in and try to stay awake for the ball drop. And and these days, again, we're increasingly old farts, so it's like watching whoever it is Ryan Seacrest is hosting in Times Square. Don't know that person. Don't know that person.
I feel I'm with you on that a lot of the times now. That's why we have the young ones. The Lainey, she's the one that tells us who these people are. And I'm like, is this a real, like we did that with the Disney. We watched the Disney special, the Christmas special, and they have these artists come up and sing. And we're like, all right, is this an actual person we should know? Or is this one of those Disney artists that they're really trying to promote and make look like a big deal? And she's been giving us good words there. We like knew Gwen Stefani, and we're like, all right, so it is what it is. But no, it's going to be a good year, Jim. I hope you and Nancy make it until midnight, and you can see that ball drop with whatever unnamed celebrity that we're not really sure is sitting next to Seacrest.
There we go. And again, we're boring people. We have sparkling cider, nothing alcohol based. But all right, I'm just going to put you on notice. I may be borrowing Lainey in the coming year, just because right. I need to be current with pop culture as well. That's the thing of working as an entertainment writer. That I literally had our friend, Seth Kabursky, who works with well, at one point a few years back, Seth kind of leaned into me and said, Jim, you need to update your references.
No, we all need a Lainey. Listen, and then when Lainey's done, Miles will be at the age where he can keep us up. He's keeping me updated with the YouTube stars and everything now. Lainey keeps me up with the pop stars. I know Sabrina Carpenter and all that because of her, and have been introduced to some really good music. So like she's keeping, but my son Hunter, he just completely skipped that generation, and he just knows good video games. So, but we got to, I will lend them off.
Those are actually 3 really good sets of job skills. You want those points of reference. You and Laura particularly with all of the podcasting you're doing these days. So Boy, you did good there.
We made
Wow.
it. We made it happen. But you know what else we did good in, Jim? We made good partnerships in the year 2025 and moving on to 2026 with our partners at Be Our Guest Vacations, right?
There we go. What a subtle slide into the ad there. Yes, and speaking of which, we have to acknowledge our sponsor here, Be Our Guest Vacations. And are you planning your next adventure? Because that's what people do this time of year. If so, let the experts at Be Our Guest Vacation take care of the details. As a platinum level earmarked travel agency, they provide top tier concierge service for trips to Universal Orlando, Universal Hollywood, the Disney parks, cruises, and more. And if you're interested, get started today at beourguestvacations.com and be sure to mention that it was the Epic Universal podcast that sent you. And okay, so I like to start the new year on a positive note, which is why as we head into the news section here, I love that you found this story. This just makes me happy to see a giant corporation actually doing something decent for its employees. So, can you please explain what Comcast, Universal, whatever is doing here?
Well, Jim, I was kind of caught off guard like you were, or at least in the sense of, number one, let's just talk. It is Universal begins construction on the Catchlight Crossings affordable housing community. And the funny thing is I had no idea what this was. I'm like, is this new? Has this come out? Whatever. I'm like, is this like one of those planned communities that Disney is doing that, and so forth. But turns out I had to read on. It says Universal Destination Experience has begun the construction of the Catchlight Crossings. Now, this is a large-scale, affordable housing community near Universal Orlando. So pretty much it's a long-term commitment to support the local community where its team members and guests live and work. And that is kind of like in a synopsis. So I had to look in. It is 20 acres, and it's near International Drive. But this is 1,000 affordable apartment homes along with on-site amenities like retail, play areas, medical offices, and community space. And I continue reading on what is going on here. Like, I'm intrigued. Like, how come I've never heard of this? But also the community is going to feature a tuition-free Bezos Academy. Now, Jim, do you know what that is? Have you ever heard of that before?
I am aware of this initiative by Mr. Bezos. The notion is, and it's not just in Orlando that this is supposedly being walked out. This is a no-cost preschool program aimed at children from lower income families. And isn't the gimmick tuition free?
Right.
I mean,
right.
That's the whole notion.
Yeah. So, I mean, I saw Bezos Academy and I'm like, all right, I only know one Bezos. So, yes, it's by Jeff Bezos, the Amazon, gentleman. So that's available, which is nice. And then there's also educational opportunities in partnership with the University of Central Florida. So my next Google search was, does the University of Central Florida have some type of partnership with Universal? And it does. It's not like a college program like the Disney aspect, but they do have a lot of crossover. So it does look like there is a lot of good, learn here, train here kind of balance in that. But also this community has buses, ride sharing, employer shuttles to get people to the area jobs. And then it says that 75% of the units will be reserved for households earning at least below 60% of the area median income.
Which, again, once upon a time, Disney World used to have 40-hour employees, and you made a very good living working at the theme parks. And that business model went away, sadly during the Michael Eisner era. That's one of those things where, Michael did a lot of good, but that was not one of the nicer things that happened during his tenure at Disney. So and think about it, just in the past year or so, there's been a lot of talk, especially out in California, about Disney cast members who are living in their cars because they can't afford. So to see something like this, where a giant corporation with theme parks is doing something nice for its employees, planning for a future with the notion of a workforce that, isn't going to be stressed out about, can I make the rent next month? So, I mean, I love this. This is, again, this is the sort of story I need in 2026. So keep them coming.
Well, I would also say, one of the better things is let's see if we can't get people, no longer below that 60%. Let's make sure we can move them. But at least in this case, there is, rent and the cost of living is expensive. So it looks to me, and this is why I've missed this, because this came out in 2021. Yep. Universal Destination Experience announced basically the Housing for Tomorrow, initiative. So that's obviously beyond our time of recording and beyond before I actually jumped into the fandom. So, but this has been a thing, and it just looks like they did a groundbreaking ceremony in November 2023. So once again, but now they just kind of announced, and there was a story April by their New 6, which is down in Orlando, that kind of gives some updates, but it's kind of coming back up, and this is the year that they'll open this. So I thought that was interesting, and since I didn't know anything about it, I imagine there were other Universal fans like myself that were like, what is this? And if you see it come across your news story, it's not a golden oak situation. We're not Universal's not necessarily building some mansions that are all themed like King Kong and Jaws, but it is a nice thing. And I don't know, do you think this is open to anyone, or is this only open to team members?
Okay, Magic 8 Ball says circle back. That's remember, think about this. We got this announced in 2021. We had a groundbreaking in November of 2023. We only just recently learned about the overall name of this project, the Catchlight Crossing. So there are various aspects of this program that will get walked out further on down the line. I do hope, though, that team members, have the express pass, to affordable housing here, So,
right.
So let's see what happens there. No.
Yeah, that's a good story to start off with, and interesting enough. When I saw it on the news, I said, what the heck is that? But I saw some other interesting things on the news, right, Jim?
It kind of interesting to go from affordable housing to a haunted house, a maze coming up potentially for this year's Halloween Horror Nights. And I gotta tell you, though, as somebody who has seen just enough of Welcome to Derry that I don't need to watch anymore, I'm a little concerned about this coming potentially to Halloween Horror Night this year. Please explain to the nice folks what we're talking about.
Yeah, well, let's put it first. This is a rumor, absolute rumor, but there could be some validity just because of the pop culture. Like you said, if you're not familiar, the It House is what people are rumoring, and it is absolutely a rumor right now. There has been no notion or talk from Universal or speculation, but we have talked before. There usually is some type of high-end IP that Universal Halloween Horror Nights picks as their top build attraction, and in the coming year, it has been very popular, and like you mentioned, the Welcome to Derry series just kind of launched, so it kind of makes sense.
Huge on HBO. It's been an enormous success, and I do want to stress, once upon a time, I read everything that Stephen King wrote. Don't get me wrong. I think to this day, he is an amazingly gifted storyteller, and there is nobody more prolific. It launched the the TV miniseries with John Ritter back in the late 80s, 1990, and then of course we get that 2-part. Movie that Warner Brothers did with Bill Skarsgård, and after seeing him, I can't go to sleep at night. And the fact that now he's back in Welcome to Derry, just sort of so I'm sure this IP, if the rumors are true, could be used to create an absolutely spectacular maze for Halloween Horror Nights 2026. But At the same time, I will stand outside and wave, Eric, as you walk in.
Oh, well, yeah. No, that's
And I'll be
well,
standing at the exit with a crying towel for you, okay?
right.
Because it's
Well, yeah,
you know.
I would need it probably. I mean, so the thing is, it is owned by Warner Brothers, so it's not a product. And I looked it up, and I would have just sworn that at some point in time, since the re-release of 2017, like they would have had some type of affiliation with Halloween Horrors. I couldn't find anything, so I don't know of any situation where it has been represented, which makes it a great play to be like, all right, this is a big deal. The first time it is at a Halloween Horror Night. So, but I did have another question though. Don't they have their own IP clown?
Oh, yes.
Would we have a clown battle? I mean, like,
And in fact, by the way, worth noting, Mike Aiello, who is, one of the big muckety mucks in Universal Creative back in the day, Mike did play Jack the Clown in the parks. I mean, Mike was one of those guys who didn't just talk the talk when it came to Halloween Horror Night. He did walk the walk. He did his time in the mazes. So, that's why when he works in that space, you got to pay attention. But yeah, no, Jack's no Pennywise, but he's right up there. There's just, he's some real nightmare fuel too. And in fact, isn't Jack showcased in the Horror Unleashed out in Vegas?
Yes. I think he's a walk around and so forth. And speaking of that, you got a nice message from a listener that we're going to cover next week, and we'll talk a little bit more about some of the latest experiences on the Universal Horror Unleashed. So we'll talk about, but as of right now, this is, it's nothing like the new year to start talking about Halloween, right?
Well, I mean, your bride and I, in the most recent, I Want That Too, we just recorded, Lauren and I were talking about how, if you blink, at Target, it goes from Christmas to Valentine's Day in a tenth of a second. In fact, I'm headed there later today to do some shopping and fully anticipate that I'm going to be beaten to death with, big pink hearts and things. Because again, it's not even January yet, but it's time to, time to be looking over the horizon at first Valentine's Day, and then just go straight to Halloween.
Why not? And I think that's Universal's playbook for sure.
There we go. Now, speaking of Universal's playbook, interesting sort of half step backwards here, keying off of a story you shared on our last episode about that there was a makeover, so to speak, announced for the horror makeup show at Universal Studios Florida, right? Which now may be on hold.
It seemed like it. So we set up until I think it was the 4th or the 5th that the horror makeup show was going to be delayed, or was basically going to be shut down and reimagined. But now they have stepped back, like you said, and it is they're going to work on it, but there's no new timetable. So you can still catch the makeup show as normal. So if you were upset that you weren't going to get there in the first week of January, you have a little bit more time. But it is. Do you think it's something? Did they have any other attraction closing that they're like, hey, we need to keep this open so something else, maintenance? I don't know, but it's weird.
Well, think about it. You already have Rip Ride Rocket down in the middle of the park.
Right.
If you think about the hourly capacity that you lost there, and if we're being honest here, Rip Ride Rocket and Horror Makeup Show are kind of front of the park things.
Yeah, they are.
So if both of those were offline at the same time, you then create an artificial strain on your attractions that are deeper in the park. And what's weird is when you talk with people who work, ops in the park, they will, for example, talk to you about, the family that's going to the makeup show is quite likely, as they walk out the door, to walk over to Mel's to have lunch. And just the notion of when the weird ripple effect when you shut down an attraction in the park, what it will have during the time you're reimagining it, the impact it'll have on retail sales or meals sold per hour. So I wonder if that factored into this at all.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see how long that happens. I mean, they don't know. So if it shuts down next week, it must have just been one thing where like, hey, we had to, there's slight back of house we had to adjust, but we'll see how that goes. Yeah. But get in there while you can.
No, absolutely. And at the very least, wander to the lobby because it's just that is such a spectacular history of the Universal horror films and so many amazing props and posters and that sort of thing on display. Um, but again, we are recording this at the tail end of the holiday season for 2025, and I guess we have to acknowledge that all good things come to an end at some point, and I guess in this case we're talking about the holiday card game that was offered this year, right?
Yeah. So I wanted to give credit. Bio Reconstruct sent us a little. He's been keeping us updated with this throughout the season, and it's probably too late for anybody listening to get these cards, but they might still have some. And I was wondering. So if you're not familiar, there was some kiosk or kind of like a card search, a game where you could go and get a holiday 3-pack of these cards, and there's Earl the Squirrel and trees and acorns and all types of stuff that you can find. So and you could get those almost for free through, and you just had to stop by. And they discontinued that. Come the 30th was the last day. So by the time you hear this, you might be able to get some packs, or if there's any left over. But I was interested in a couple things, Jim. Number one, it's a nice freebie, a nice thing to gather, a nice reason to get you further in the park probably to get this. But do you think these cards are going to have like collector value? Do these typically have like a collector value in the long run?
Well, it depends on how you define long run.
Well, sure.
The weird thing is, let's be honest here. The cult of Earl the Squirrel every year gets a little bigger, a little more rabid. It kind of cracked me up to see the list, or the group of people standing out in front of that Airstream trailer to get their picture taken with Earl this holiday season on Hollywood Boulevard in Florida. And, given this is so Earl the Squirrel centric, I would imagine if you manage to collect the full set and, stuff them in a plastic bag, keep them pristine, and then pull them out in 5 to 10 years. I'm not saying you're going to send your kid to college, but, you can set yourself a nice dinner at some point, on Earl's dime.
Well, I mean, if you're going to buy them on eBay, get them this year, right? While nobody's thinking about them.
There we go.
Or head over there and see if they got any laying around in the back or whatever.
And, as we close out the news segment here, folks, again, want to remind you, we have a contractual obligation on every podcast to mention Wicked for Good. And Eric's chased down a particularly interesting story this time around. You want to talk about what just happened with this John M. Chu film and, why it's significant?
Well, I mean, here's the thing is I went a week early. I went and saw it in the theaters a week ago, and I could have just waited a week because I could have watched it from my couch, because it is now available on the digital platform. You can get it on VOD, POVOD. So you're basically paying for it. But once again, just like last year, within 24 hours of just one day, it is the number one most watched PVOD title in America. And not just America, in many, many different countries. There was a slew of countries. But I thought it was our obligation to tell you guys that if you have not seen it yet, you can see it for the wonderful price to rent it for $19.99 on Amazon or Apple or so forth. You can buy it for $29.99, or you can bundle, which is funny. You can get the first and the second, which they did mention that the first one is jumped right up the charts as well because of the interest, and that's $39.99. So you have your chance. And one of employee of mine, Jenny, we were looking at stories together and coming up with stuff, and she actually mentioned that it's not just the actual movie, but this actually comes with an hour of bonus content, and I didn't know that.
And that's deleted scenes, that director's commentary, behind the scenes stuff. So
you forgot sing along, because that is what my wife and daughter will be doing. So I'll be hearing that.
Well, okay. But again, for a film nerd like myself, that the behind the scenes stuff, that's the real value. And by the way, speaking of Universal home media, I want to stress that again, every year, no one knows what to get me, so they send me Amazon gift cards, and I actually this time around used some of them to get the 4K of illuminations of The Bad Guys 2.
Oh yeah.
So again, Mr. Taylor, who I do fine tuning with, is a big proponent of physical media. So it's like doing my part. Want to make sure these things stay out in the world. And again, that's what's interesting, is that it's only on these things like this POVD of Wicked for Good that you get those, those directors' commentaries and the behind the scenes stuff that sometimes over the years goes into the vault and doesn't come out again.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, I have every season of South Park, and I love the commentary from Trey and Matt, and like I don't think you probably get that anywhere else unless you have the physical DVD. So, and I'm building a new shelf, Jim. I had to build a new shelf to extend my new books and my new DVDs and everything we got. So, like that's always a good sign. So
that's so cool. That's so cool. So, all right. So, before we close out this week's news segment and get to the feature, you did have, I know you mentioned this at the top of the show, but you wanted to sort of circle back on our Universal Horror Unleashed news?
Yeah, well, we'll do that next week. There's a decent amount of stuff. We had a nice listener, Brian, send us stuff. I want to acknowledge that we're going to talk about that next week. There was some nice hacks and tips and tricks that I thought we should share. So, but also the fun part is, if you guys have been, has anybody's gone there yet, I'd love to compile a list. So if so, send an email over to Jim. You can reach him at jim@jimhillmedia.com or eric@erichersey.com. And we'll put those together, and just kind of anybody that's planning to go out there for the year, we can kind of give you our tips and tricks for
cool.
Universal Horror Unleashed. So send those over and we'll put those together.
Yeah. Again, if you've got any burning questions, and speaking of burning, when we get back from this break, we're going to talk at least about how we got the burning house out on the Tram Tour at Universal Hollywood. But first, there's this.
I had that dream again. My small business needs to hire, but I don't use LinkedIn, and I hire wrong. So then I'm doing IT, and when I go to plug the servers in, they become sentient, and they won't let us access our network unless we forward their chain emails and memes to more and more and more people, and then I wake up.
Don't let hiring nightmares ruin your dreams. LinkedIn Jobs' new AI assistant finds and invites best fit candidates to apply, so you can discover talent you may have missed. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/quality. Start hiring today with LinkedIn.
And we're back. Okay, folks. I look, there's an expression I've never personally understood, which is these two are getting along like a house of fire. And it's like, so for me, that's like, what does that mean? These two people have rapidly warmed to one another. This is a highly combustible relationship. I mean, help me out here. What does that mean?
I can't help you, Jim. I don't have the slightest.
Okay. Well, anyway, I bring up this saying today because I wanted to talk about an early addition to the Tram Tour out at Universal Studios Hollywood, and that is the burning house. Now, earlier on the Epic Universal podcast, Eric and I have talked about J-Bangs. And these were the additions that were made to the Tram Tour out in Hollywood under the direction of Jay Stein. And want to remind you, we lost Jay Stein back in November of this past year, 2025, at the age of 88. And more to the point, Jay was the guy who turned the Tram Tour into what it is today, which is a must-do if you're ever out in Southern California playing tours. Anyway, on this podcast, we talked previously about how the flash flood got added to the Mexican Village set on the lower lot back in 1968. And today, we're going to take a look at what Jay did on the heels of that success to continue to plus the Hollywood Tram Tour. Because here's the thing, Eric. Lou Wasserman, the then head of MCA, the parent company of the Universal Parks, he loved the flash flood. And largely because it was cheap to operate. It was reliable. And by that, I mean every 4 minutes, a brand new tram load of tourists would come rolling up to the Mexican Village, and then a 20,000 gallon wall of water would roll down the street The tourists on the tram would have a brief thrill. Meanwhile, all the water would get collected in tanks just past the tram and quickly get pumped uphill. So this very same water could then be reused to create yet another flash flood when the very next tram came along in 4 minutes. So, I mean, that's crazy efficient, don't you think?
Yeah, I'd say so.
Okay. So now the challenge that Jay had was, well, he needed another flash flood-like moment to add to the tram tour out in Hollywood, which is harder than it looks. To think about it, he's got to create something big enough that 3 trams full of people, and by the way, here's our math problem for today, folks. In the late 1960s, the Universal City Hollywood, the attraction, when it was dispatching tram loads of tourists, it would send a train of 3 cars out at the start of each tour. And since each of these tram cars could only hold 67 people, so 3 times 67, that's 211.
Got the calculator out. Yep.
All right. But then, you got to figure every tram isn't going out completely full. So, all right, let's say on average, 200 people go out in each tram at the start of each tour. So, again, here's Jay's problem. He needs to do what his boss, Lou Wasserman, said, which is add more flash flood-like moments to Universal City Tram Tour, which, again, whatever he's doing, needs to be big enough so that all 200 people who are on board that tram tour can see what's going on at the exact same time. And again, another key component to this project is each of these additions to the tram tour has to be repeatable and affordable. And most importantly, something that could then be reset inside of 4 minutes. Because again, that's when your next tram load of tourists is coming along. So that's kind of a tricky assignment, don't you think, Eric?
Yeah, I mean, unless you're doing another flood situation, right?
Well, there we go. Well, and I want to point out here that not everything that Jay tried early on worked. Take, for example, that mechanical gorilla that Stein installed down by Park Lake on the lower lot in 1969 or thereabouts. This, by the way, would have been just a year or so after the flash flood scene originally debuted on the tram tour. Now, to give you a little background here, folks, Park Lake, in fact, it still exists at Universal Studios Hollywood. In fact, it's that body of water that's just to your right when you're on the tram tour and you're about to experience the parting of the Red Seas. But anyway, Park Lake, over the past 100 years or so, has been a very active shooting location at Universal Studios. Both the part talkie version of Showboat, the version was made in 1929, and then the full-on movie musical of that Broadway show, which was released in theaters some 7 years later in 1936. They were both shot there, with Park Lake redressed as the Mighty Mississippi. On the other hand, if we jump ahead to the 1950s, Park Lake is now used for one of Eric's personal favorite films. This is where the original creature from the Black Lagoon was shot. And then for a span of years in the mid-1960s, Park Lake is dressed so that it then looks like an island in the South Seas, because this is where McHale's Navy, the TV show, was shot on the Universal Lola lot from 1964 to 1967. All right, so you got your background. So picture this. It's now the winter of 1968, 1969. Again, flash flood scene has been on the tram tour since the previous summer. Big hit. And Jay's boss is like, give me more of those. So Stein is literally walking around the lower lot, looking for places where he can then add affordable, repeatable moments along the tram route. And so Jay one day is walking past the McHale's Navy jungle, which is still standing in place at the edge of Park Lake. And again, just a reminder, this is late 68, early 69. TV series has been off the air, out of production for almost 3 years now. Ended in the late winter of 66. But But Universal left the South Seas theme sets for McHale's Navy in place because, Eric, just to be blunt here, it gave people who were on the early version of the Tram Tour something to look at as they rolled by. And, wow, look at those collapsing television sets. But anyway, Jay's walking along this part of the tram route, and he sees the jungle, that's in place by the old McHale's Navy set. And he stops for a minute and thinks, well, who else lives in the jungle? And then it's like, the first movie-related name that came to mind was Tarzan.
Right.
Okay, but here's the thing: the Tarzan movies, the ones that starred five-time Olympic gold medalist swimmer Johnny Weissmuller, those were primarily made at MGM over in Culver City.
Right, because they were in the Great Movie Ride. That's right.
There we go. There we go. All right, first of those, by the way, released back in 1932. Then over the next 10 years, Johnny makes an additional 5 Tarzan movies for MGM, whereas Weissmuller then signs with RKO and makes 6 more Tarzan movies for that studio between 42 and 48.
More math. How many movies? That's a lot of Tarzan.
That's a lot. That was a very busy loincloth. Okay, we're just going to say that. But, here's the thing. All of those movies were made over at MGM and RKO. And so it just didn't make sense or wouldn't be legal for Universal to add a scene to its Tram Tour that would then pay tribute to the Tarzan film series. But then again, there had recently been the Tarzan TV series, which had debuted on NBC September of 1968, starred Ron Ely as the title character, and wasn't especially long-lived, only ran for 2 seasons at NBC and then ended its run on the Peacock Network in April of 1968. But that said, Jay knew that if a tram load of tourists, as they were traveling by the McHale's Navy jungle, if they were to suddenly hear Tarzan's famous yell, which, by the way, at that point in Hollywood history, even Carol Burnett could imitate the Tarzan yell. It was like they would immediately look up and look at the trees and expect to see the ape man swinging through on a vine. And remember that Jay is looking to set up something similar to the Flash Flood, something that 200 people who are traveling together on a tram tour can all see and experience at the exact same time. So, but in this case, what Stein had in mind was not a thrilling moment per se, but there's no other way to say this, Eric. A pretty gross sight gag. What kind of gross sight gag? All right. So again, picture this: you're on the tram tour. You're going by the jungle. You hear Tarzan's famous cry. So you look up to see not the ape man swinging by in a vine, but a full-size gorilla who's now holding in his paw what looks like a man's severed arm. Which are
they killed Tarzan? Is that what happened? Okay.
Well, now the interesting thing is the Universal Tram, the team member who's serving as the host of the Tram Tour would then turn to the passengers and say something to the effect of, "Oof, looks like the King of Apes just lost his crown. Ooh, that's gotta hurt. No wonder Tarzan is yelling." And by the way, I've also been told there was an alternate joke the team members would do at this point to the effect of, by the way, if any of you on the tram today are looking for assistance, well, I believe that gorilla can lend you a hand. I'm sorry. I know. 2 horrible dad jokes.
Yeah, is this before or after the Jungle Cruise started doing these types of jokes? Because I know.
Thank you so much for bringing that up. We're actually going to talk about that on today's show.
Okay.
And by the way, I was told that this particular gag, the severed arm thing, was only in place on the lower lot as part of the tram tour from the summer of 1969 through the fall of 72. And the way it was explained to me was that Lou Wasserman told Jay Stein that the studio tour had actually gotten letters from moms who then wrote in to say that their kids were upset because they saw the mechanical gorilla swing by holding a severed human hand, or severed human arm, which is why Jay needed to find a different gag to present in this particular stretch of the tour. And what was kind of interesting is that Stein actually pushes back a bit on his boss, because, well, he says, well, first of all, Disneyland doesn't have one gorilla. It's got two giant gorillas in its Jungle Cruise. And more to the point, our gorilla, the one here at Universal, is so much more realistic than a one at Disney. And it's lifelike, and it swings on a vine. And which to Wasserman, he replies to Jay, it's like, look, first of all, Disneyland removed both of its giant gorillas in '68. By the way, weird fun fact that you as a Disney fan will appreciate, Eric. When they removed the gorillas, that's when Trader Sam first appeared in the Jungle Cruise.
All right.
And in fact, to get to your, when do the silly gags start? With the Jungle Cruise, this is Sam during his initial appearance. This is where you got the joke. It's like, well, he's willing to offer you, two of his heads for one of yours. And anyway, Lou Wasserman's like, yeah, that's nice, but none of the apes down at Disneyland have a severed arm in their hand. It's like, so I don't want any more letters. Get rid of that gag. So Jay does what Lou wants, but how do we get from a gorilla swinging by, a tramload of tourists, to a house that's forever on fire? We're going to get to that in a moment. But first, this. And we're back. Just a quick follow-up on that short-lived gorilla joke from the Universal Tram Tour. And because, again, Eric brought this up earlier, that, first of all, both of these attractions, the Tram Tour at Universal and the Jungle Cruise at Disneyland, were spiel attractions, meaning that as you rolled by show scenes and that sort of thing, you got a narration. And also, there's some additional connective tissue between these two now decades-old theme park experiences, in that the original Glamour trams at Universal City Hollywood, as well as the Jungle Cruise launches at Disneyland, both designed by the same guy, Hopper Goff, Disney legend. And as long as we're shining a spotlight on what Harper did, want to remind you that he was the guy who designed the Nautilus for Disney's Academy Award-winning version of 20,000 Leagues. But here's the thing. Jungle Cruise and the Tram Tour, at least when they both initially started, had fact-based spiels. In fact, Eric, they were deadly serious. And it was only in the summer of 1964, and that's when the Lost Safari scene first debuted on the Jungle Cruise, that any humor began to creep into that Adventureland attraction. So we're talking 9 years into the Jungle Cruise's existence before that happens. Whereas silly stuff for the Universal City Tram Tour, well, again, remember that launches June of 64, and we're now talking summer of 69. So what, 5 years?
Right.
We finally get our gorilla swinging by clutching a human severed arm. And I also want to talk about what Jay did immediately after this Tarzan-inspired scene, the follow-up gag, because what was interesting is your tram was then supposed to pull out of the jungle, and the very first thing this tramload of tourists was supposed to see was the snow cottage. And this, Eric, very elaborate outdoor set that was supposed to appear as if it were, set deep in winter. That Universal was supposed to look like a film crew was going to show up and shoot a scene that was set in New England in January. So you got this quaint building with a roof, covered with snow, full-size trees in the yard that are flocked with snow, little shrubs flanking the door, and again, the whole conceit is, we're going to show you some movie magic, and how, when you're traveling around the lower lot of this historic, Hollywood studio, you could suddenly go from the heat of the jungle to the depth of winter.
And they do that to this day still at Hogsmeade or Universal Florida. Right?
They do. Now, it's interesting you mentioned, of course, the Harry Potter films, which are huge, huge, huge hits, because That's also what came into play with Jay's decision here. Now, remember, we just talked about how Jay was confident creating that jungle scene that referenced Tarzan because, there had just been a Tarzan television series on NBC. And so he was like, I'm fairly confident that if a tramload of people go by, they will know who this character is. Now, and it was kind of the same thing with the Snow Cottage because in late December of 65, MGM had released its movie version of Dr. Zhivago. And this was a David Lean movie, became an enormous success, took home 5 Academy Awards, and eventually became the 9th highest grossing film in Hollywood history. But even today, Eric, when people talk about Dr. Zhivago, the scene that they most often bring up is where Omar Sharif and Julie Christie find themselves in the Snow Palace, which is this remote building far off in the Russian countryside that is entirely encased in ice. And what's fascinating about this from a Hollywood history point of view is this David Lean movie was actually shot in Spain in the heat of the summer. So when you're looking at these snow scenes, there is all sorts of movie trickery going on. I mean, for example, to get the ice that's melted beeswax that's been painted white, and the little piles of snow in the house are actually chipped white marble. But anyway, Stein knew that tourists who were experiencing the Universal Tram Tour in the late 1960s would undoubtedly have seen Dr. Zhivago when it had been out in theaters. So when they came around the corner from the Tarzan jungle and saw the fully, full-size Snow Cottage there on the tram route, these people would immediately say, hey, that's just like that building and Dr. Zhivago. Now, mind you, Stein is smart enough to toe the line here, not do anything that might get Universal in trouble with MGM. So, for example, the snow-encrusted building along the tram route called the Snow Cottage, whereas Dr. Zhivago has the Snow Palace. And also that building there along the tram route, it's designed to look like a building that's experiencing a cozy New England winter rather than a brutal, winter out in Siberia. Now, the only complaint that Universal ever got from tourists on the tram tour in regard to the Snow Cottage was, well, the scene on the lower lot only looked cold. In fact, these very same people, when surveyed after the fact about their tram experience, reportedly said, well, I just wish I had been able to feel the cold as we rolled by this part of the lower lot. And now, to give Jay credit, he actually reportedly investigated this idea, with the idea of, okay, so how about this? We set up some industrial strength air conditioners set up on either side of the road that are pointed into the tram. So, with the idea that we set up an electric eye system. And as soon as the tram, the 3-car tram enters this space, these giant industrial strength air conditioners kick on. They're blowing cold air on the people who are in the tram, who are looking at the window, at the Snow Cottage scene. And as soon as the tram moves through the space where the Snow Cottage is, and it breaks the final electric eye, these air conditioners turn off. Kind of an ingenious idea, don't you think?
Yeah, I think that is not only a thing that they should still do in anywhere that's relatively cold, because it throws you off if you're somewhere that looks cold but still is 90 degrees, 80 degrees. Go. So I think it's genius and glad they pulled that off.
Well, now what's interesting is that Stein brings this idea to the engineers at Universal, and they investigate it. They eventually come back and it's like, look, I'm sorry. It's a great idea, but it's impractical. I mean, because the Snow Cottage is open to the sky. So there's no guarantee that even if we're aiming these things directly into the tram, the guests will get the full benefit of these industrial strength air conditioners. And that's a lot of time, money, and effort being put into something that guests will likely not feel. So, that said, though, Eric, it's worth noting that if we jump ahead just a couple of years, 1975, when the ice tunnel is being added to the Tram Tour. Jay takes all of the research that Universal's engineers had done just a few years previous and then uses that to create this genuinely frosty, freezy guest experience for tourists to experience. In fact, for years, that was the finale of the Glamour Tram. And I have to say here, folks, that was what was great about Jay Stein. He was a lot like Walt Disney in that way, and that Jay, just like Walt, never forgot an idea. He had this crazy bear trap of a mind where, if you said something, like 5 years later, it's like, no, that meeting in July of 1964 when you said this, can we still do that? And so, but anyway, now back to the snow cottage scene at Universal City. Again, the Tram Tour out in Hollywood. So Jay's disappointed. He can't give tourists a blast of winter cold as they're traveling through this part of the lower lot. But now Jay thinks it's like, well, could we go the other way? Like, say, expose the people on the Tram Tour to a blast of heat. Now, how do we eventually get to Universal's Burning House, which, by the way, first comes online on the Tram Tour in 1973? And I want to point out that was then the inspiration for what many have called the most spectacular show ever staged in the Universal Parks, which was Backdraft, which opened in the parks July of 1992. Sorry, folks, you're going to have to come back next week for me to share that part of the story. But in closing, since we just spent so much time talking about snow at the Universal Studios Hollywood, I wanted to briefly mention something that this theme park put in its upper lot, summer of 1965, which was the push button snow scene. And by the way, folks, if you Google right now that set of search terms, Universal Hollywood push button snow, you will actually then see a postcard that this theme park sold back in 1965, which shows a short-lived guest experience on the upper lot where guests would walk into this indoor space where they could then stand in front of a wintry backdrop, and then with the push of a button, Eric, they could, with their home, movie camera, shoot a scene where these people seem to be frolicking outdoors as artificial snow gently rains down on them. Now, got to tell you, this was discontinued after a few months for a couple of reasons. One, it was hard to reset. And more to the point, the artificial snow had to be regularly swept up off of the ground and then reloaded into the mechanism at the top of the room that made it, sprinkle down. And I want to say, Eric, that this was cornflakes that were painted white, which, by the way, that was the industry standard back then for creating a falling snow effect. Because, God, I hope it wasn't asbestos, because that was the other thing that they did in Hollywood back in the day, because it looked good on camera. Again, looks like good on camera, not so good for the lungs. But
right, and that's what they did. In The Wizard of Oz, I believe.
There we go.
Instead, they should have used Frosted Flakes, and sooner or later they did have the Snope, right? So Snope did come around, but not here, unfortunately. Not enough time, so we did get it in the 90s, 30 years too late.
All true. But anyway, folks, so like I said, we will continue that story and get to the actual burning house and Backdraft on next week's show. But for now, that's going to do it for this week's edition of the Epic Universal Podcast. And by the way, if you have topics and suggestions that you'd like Mr. Hersey and I discuss on future shows, please send them along to us via social media. And beyond that, a happy belated New Year's, and we will bring you more shows in 2026.